Today, we are diving into a really groundbreaking novel called The Open Door by Latifa al-Zayyat. And it's this incredible story about two fights for freedom that are happening at the exact same time. One is a young woman's fight against the cage of tradition, and the other is her country, Egypt, fighting against the chains of colonialism.
So to really get this story, you have to understand these two parallel prisons at its heart. On one side, you've got our main character, Layla. She's trapped by a super conservative father. She has almost no real choices, and there's just this constant, immense pressure to get married. Then on the other side, you have her entire country, Egypt, trapped by foreign occupation, political chaos, and this deep, deep struggle to figure out its own identity. These two worlds, they're on a collision course.
All right, so here's how we're going to break down Layla's journey. We'll start inside that cage she lives in. Then we'll see those first sparks of rebellion. We're going to watch how her personal fight gets tangled up with Egypt's, see her hit rock bottom, and then have this huge breakthrough. And finally, we'll talk about why this story is still so incredibly important today.
Okay, let's begin. We're in 1940s Cairo. The political situation is tense, to say the least. And it's right here that we meet Layla, a really curious, passionate, and, rebellious young girl who's living in a world with some very, very strict rules.
Layla's world is basically a pressure cooker. Her dad is the absolute authority. What he says goes, period. Her mom, who you'd think might be an ally, actually just reinforces all the traditions that are boxing Layla in. Meanwhile, her brother, Mahmoud, is treated like a hero for being politically active, the very thing that's forbidden to her. And society all around them is screaming one clear message. A girl's only worth comes from her obedience, her so-called honor, and who she marries.
But here's the thing about Layla. She wasn't built to just sit down and accept things. Almost right away, she starts to push back. Not with some big, dramatic gesture at first, but with these quiet, powerful questions that start to shake the very foundations of her world.
It all starts with something so simple and so unfair that she sees right there in her own house. She watches her brother Mahmoud go to protests, talk about politics, and engage with the world, and she just can't wrap her head around why that same fire in her is seen as something wrong. It's a question of basic fairness.
And that leads her to an even bigger, scarier question about her own purpose. Is her entire life just a waiting room for becoming a wife and a mother? Is there no space for her own dreams, her own mind, her own story?
And this is where she gets truly radical for her time. She starts to pick apart the very words they use to control her. What even is this idea of honor that only seems to apply to women? She starts to realize it's not a virtue, it's a leash. It's a cage disguised as something noble. Okay, now we're jumping ahead to her university years, and let me tell you, this is where everything flips. Layla's private little rebellion is about to go very public, and her personal questions suddenly get an answer from the roar of an entire nation demanding its own freedom.
Once she's on campus, Layla is no longer on the sidelines. She is in it. She's joining student movements, she's marching in anti-British protests, she's debating nationalist ideas, and right there, in the middle of all that energy, a huge light bulb goes off for her. Her struggle to have a voice in her own home is a perfect mirror of Egypt's struggle to have a voice on the world stage.
And this right here, this is the absolute soul of the entire novel. This is not just a story about feminism or a story about a country fighting colonialism. It's about how those two fights are the same fight. They're inseparable. The book's full point is that you can't have one without the other. You can't build a truly free nation if half your people are still in chains. Layla's fight becomes the nation's fight in miniature.
But this amazing awakening, it doesn't mean it's smooth sailing from here. In fact, Layla's journey is about to take a really dark turn. Just as she's finding her voice politically, she falls into a deep personal crisis. And it shows up, as it so often does, disguised as love.
Her first big relationship is with a guy named Isam, and at first it probably felt like the escape she'd been dreaming of. But that romance turns sour fast. His love just becomes another form of control, another cage built out of jealousy and his own expectations of who she should be.
But then, when she's at her absolute lowest, she meets Hussein, and through him, she discovers this completely radical new idea that love doesn't have to be a prison. It can actually be the key that sets you free.
And this just lays it all out so perfectly. You've got Isam, the cage. He's controlling, jealous, and he wants to squeeze her into a mold that fits his life. He wants to shrink her world. And then you have Hussein,
the key. He's respectful, trusting, and he supports her ambitions. He doesn't want to limit her independence. He actively encourages her to be free. He doesn't want to own her. He wants to watch her become herself.
This brings us to the incredible climax of the whole story. Just as Layla makes this huge personal choice for herself, Egypt faces its own massive moment of truth. And the two liberations, they finally sync up in this beautiful, powerful way.
Just look at this parallel. In the 1940s, it's simple. Egypt is ruled by Britain. Layla is ruled by her family. Fast forward to 1956, during the Suez Crisis, Egypt stands up on the world stage and reclaims the Suez Canal, a huge act of national defiance. And at that exact moment, Layla stands up and reclaims her own life.
And her freedom isn't something that just happens to her. No way. It's an active choice, a deliberate process. Step 1, she consciously rejects the life everyone else mapped out for her. Step 2, she reclaims the person they tried to make her forget. And finally, step 3, she takes that terrifying, thrilling step. She opens the door to a future she hasn't planned, but one that will be her own.
And that central metaphor, it's just everything. The open door isn't just about escaping something bad. It's a symbol of pure potential. It represents a future where Layla, and by extension Egypt, is no longer defined by what they're afraid of, but by what they have the freedom to choose.
So why are we still talking about a novel that was published back in 1960, right? Why does Layla's story still hit so hard, decades later, all around the world? It matters because these themes are completely timeless. The fight against patriarchy, that's a universal story. A nation's fight for its own identity, still happening all over the world. The huge realization that your personal freedom and your political freedom are totally connected, more relevant than ever. And at the very bottom of it all, that search for who you really are, well, that's the ultimate act of rebellion, isn't it? And this really brings us to the single biggest takeaway from The Open Door. It's the lesson Layla learns the hard way. Liberation is never a gift. It doesn't just show up on your doorstep. It has to be fought for. It has to be seized. It has to be actively claimed with every bit of courage you have.
You know, Layla's story is really a powerful reminder that every single one of us has the power to challenge the cages we find ourselves in. And it leaves us with this one last big question that connects her journey directly to ours. What door in your life is waiting for you to open it?